Hi, everybody. I am Saurav, a science teacher and teacher educator at Azim Premji Foundation and a field editor with I Wonder. For those joining us for the first time, I Wonder is a science magazine for middle and high school teachers. We feature writings about the many dimensions of teaching and learning of science in class and outside class. We publish in English, Hindi, and Kannada twice a year. We also host discussions with authors on the second Wednesday every month. If you are a practicing science teacher, we invite you to write for us. Please send us your ideas in 100 words and send over an email. I wonder at apu.edu.in. To receive updates of each webinar and a free print version of each issue, please subscribe by following the link displayed in the description of this video. You can also catch us on Facebook. Today, we have with us Radha Gopalan. She is author of the article Getting to the Soul of Soil from our August 2018 issue. Radha is an environmental scientist with a PhD from the Indian Institute of Technology or IIT Bombay. After an 18-year career in environmental consultation, she taught environmental science at Rishi Valley Education Center. She is a visiting faculty at the School of Development. She in Azim Premji University, one of the editors of I Wonder, and a member of the Kodali International Learning Center, Telangana. Radha, thank you for joining us and welcome.
Thanks, Saurav. Thank you. Thank you.
So, Radha, we are going to discuss about your paper that we have already mentioned about it. But before we start, let me give all of you, all the audience, I welcome all the audience, and I'm giving you a brief of the discussion and the pattern. The format of today's discussion would be for the first 30 minutes, I will ask Radha some questions about her article, what she has written, what is her ideas. Here she will elaborate these ideas. All those who have joined us today, you are requested to type your questions in the chat box. In the next 30 minutes, I will choose these questions from the chat box and I will direct these questions to Radha for answers. And if you have further questions or you have questions on these answers, you can put your questions again. And this will go on. So my request would be please pitch in and start typing your questions. Soil is an interesting topic and it's very much found in the middle and high school curriculum in India in several subjects, in science, maybe mostly, in EVS, even in literature, and at higher grades in geography. And soil is very known to us. At least for all the terrestrial animals, soil is very important, right? We see it. But when you see something for a long time, or most of the time, we often don't give adequate attention to those because we take it for granted. But sometimes things we don't take for granted, but they are so essential for us that we cannot ignore. And if for long, if we don't take care of them and if we don't give attention, what happens in turn, they force us to drive our attention to them. And this is how the nature is working. And what Radha will tell us about her article, certainly, and also she has mentioned many dimensions of teaching soil and what is soil. She has also pointed out the areas of understanding that need to be brought in to understand soil better. So, Radha, you use the word soul in the title.
That's right.
And the title of the article is Getting to the Soul of Soil. And later you mentioned that humus is the heart and soil. I am curious, why did you choose these words? Heart, soul.
Thanks, Saurav. That's a great question, actually. Now, when I use the word soul, right, it was actually to sort of tell the reader, or of this article, that we're actually getting to the essence of soil. Because, like you mentioned, I mean, soil comes to us in geography textbooks, in physics, chemistry, etc. But somehow we don't seem to be getting to what makes life possible in soil. You see, so when I use the words heart and soul, it was to bring an emotional connection to soil, and to highlight the fact that there is this life-giving component of soil, which is humus. So which then becomes the heart of the soil, right, or the soul of the soil. And like you mentioned, it's quite poorly understood, this whole idea of both humus and soil actually being alive. I guess that's the word to use for it. The other thing, of course, is we use a lot of words like dirt and mud, etc. And I think that this is what has created a sort of a disconnect. And maybe I'm being a bit strong, but I also feel it sort of alienated us from something that is so fundamental, right, to our lives. And one last point that I wanted to make here also, Saurabh, is that I feel like vocabulary is just so crucial to the way we learn, right? The way the choice of words, when we call it earth versus dirt, right, the perception of soil changes. And also, I mean, here I would actually like to sort of bring in the words of the soil microbiologist Selman Waxman, who's done this fantastic treatise on humus, right? And he says that, and this was in 1938, he's saying this, right? He says that, the importance of humus, and I'm going to just quote directly, the importance of humus in human economy seldom receives sufficient emphasis. Suffice to say that it probably represents the most important source of human wealth on this planet. Nature has stored in and upon the earth, in the form of humus, the source of a vast amount of readily available energy, a large part of the carbon needed for life processes, and most of the combined nitrogen, so much needed for plant growth. So I think, Waxman puts it so beautifully that I don't think I can say anything more at this point. But yeah, so this long answer to your question of why I use the word, yeah, soul and heart.
Right. So, Radha, thank you for mentioning these two use why you have used these two words. And I think over our discussion, and also when we'll get more questions from participants, the audience, we can understand, we can discuss more about those,
Yeah,
and we'll open these layers with it.
correct.
So I also want to know one very associated question, that what
Mm-hmm.
are what are some key concepts about soil that you hope this article will highlight for school science teachers? क्या आप इस पेपर में ऐसे क्या कोर कॉन्सेप्ट है जो मिट्टी के बारे में, मृदा के बारे में,
Hmm.
जो स्कूल साइंस टीचर के लिए हाईलाइट करना जरूरी है, एंड सो दैट people can go to that article and read.
हाँ, नहीं, एकदम बहुत सही बात है। तो जब टीचर्स, मतलब जो भी रीडर्स जो पढ़ रहे हैं ये आर्टिकल, एक तो चीज़ जो मुझे बहुत ही इम्पोर्टेंट पॉइंट मुझे मतलब बताना था कि सॉइल इज डायनामिक, मतलब इसमें हमेशा कुछ ना कुछ प्रोसेसेस चलते रहते हैं, कि जैसे ये इसका फॉर्मेशन जो होता है, देयर आर फिजिकल फोर्सेस, मैकेनिकल फोर्सेस, केमिकल प्रोसेसेस, बायोलॉजिकल। सो मतलब ये कंटिन्यूसली फॉर्मेशन ब्रेकडाउन का जो वो एक पैटर्न है, right? So I wanted to highlight, I think that's one concept that needs to be understood, कि soil is dynamic. दूसरी बात तो ये है कि जब हम बायोलॉजिकल प्रोसेसेस के बारे में बात करते हैं ना, तो इन सॉइल फॉर्मेशन व्हेन वी टॉक अबाउट इट, देन देयर इज एन इम्पोर्टेंट एलिमेंट कि माइक्रोब्स का क्या रोल है, माइक्रो ऑर्गेनिजम्स क्या क्या करते हैं. and also what is their role in making humus so significant to all life. So and the third point I think, which I think is quite important, is कि सॉइल को जब हम देखते हैं, मतलब व्हेन वी कम टू सॉइल, तो वो थोड़ा एक ट्रिकी सिचुएशन है, क्योंकि इसमें जो प्रश्न जो निकलता है कि क्लासिफिकेशन का, कि भाई ये अलाइव है या डेड है या लिविंग है या नॉन लिविंग है, जो भी, मतलब ऐसे जो कंफ्यूजन आते हैं हमारे जहन में क्लासिफिकेशन के बारे में, आई थिंक सॉइल इज ऑल्सो अ वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग मीडियम टू अंडरस्टैंड दैट. And maybe teachers can use this to also think about this idea कि जब हम classification या categorization के बारे में बात करते हैं, तो it's not कि nature में, मतलब nature नहीं, but reality में जो है, environment में classification नहीं होता है ना. classification तो हम अपने understanding के लिए करते हैं. So we do this categorization and classification for our understanding. So I
Very
feel
important.
soil is a very rich environment or a topic through which teachers can look at all these concepts. Yeah.
This you have actually. I'm so much connected with you when you said this. That
Right.
yeah, classification does not exist in nature, but we are so much obsessed with the idea of classification.
Correct.
For example, in soil also we'll ask how many types of soil are there, but
Yeah.
it is very difficult to find a particular pure kind of soil. This
Correct.
classification, this is so unreal,
Mm-hmm.
and probably we have to think about it. Okay,
Mm.
so Radha probably will come to these points again, and I'm very hopeful that we will get lots of questions on this. And
Yeah.
because in the school we usually teach that we are very much obsessed with all this. So
Mm-hmm.
next question is for very from my side, that
Mm.
what is your experience with the school students? What is the kind of understanding about soil students come with into classroom, or is this the kind of understanding that they develop through a formal introduction to science? So, say uh, something can happen through daily experiences, and in your article also there is a mention of all these things, and another is formal science class. So here I think when Radha will speak, the practicing teachers can also share their experiences
Mm.
about that. So I will go to Radha, and
Yeah.
Radha, please share your
Yeah,
experience.
sure. Yeah, this is a very important point, sort of this, I think, about context and what children come to, with what do they come into class with, students. Okay? So, see, often, of course, for many of us, we have studied soil in the textbooks and how it's defined, like what you said, the horizons, the classification, all that. Right? So that is a formal introduction. But students are coming from diverse backgrounds, right? I mean, for instance, even those who may have just mucked around in soil, have done some gardening at home, grown some food, maybe just exposed to any kind of working with the earth, with the soil, they come with a certain understanding. Then there are those children who come from farming backgrounds, right? So they come with a completely different understanding and a real life experience of having dealt with soil, right? So relationships to soil, therefore, are very diverse, and so therefore their perceptions are also very different. Now, I just wanted to tell the readers that just before this article, there was in the same issue, there was another article by a colleague and friend of mine from Rishi Valley, and he talks about learning about soil and students' voices. That's the article by Santosh. And there he gives examples that even though children have come from a rural background, so here we're talking about children who've come from farming communities in the surrounding area, but there also they have very different perceptions of soil. Some of them think about soil. Some of them think about songs when they think about soil. Some of them think about the smell of water on wet earth. So there is a sort of a very emotional sort of a relationship with soil. And then there are other kids, of course, because that school, I mean, Rishi Valley, where Santosh also works, they also have, urban kids who are in a rural environment. So there is a certain utilitarian understanding of soil. Soil gives us food, we need good soil for nutrition, so on and so forth, right? Now, when children come from different contexts, and particularly when children come from farming backgrounds, or where they have real life experience of and relate to soil very differently, sometimes they do experience conflicts in the classroom. And this has happened with me a couple of times when I've sort of done some work in the Zilla Parishad high schools around Rishi Valley. And there is a conflict because they come with a completely different perception and experience of soil. And then they read these textbooks. In the textbook, they encounter it as this structure that you referred to earlier. So what happens is there is a reconciliation of these two, the experience and the classroom knowledge. That is, it can be a bit of a challenge for teachers. And like for instance, I think it was in the August 2019 issue as well. Deborah Datta had written about pedagogy of dirty hands. There, it's all urban kids, okay, in an urban background. They are sort of growing vegetables on the terrace of their school. Now, there was one child who came from a farming background who was very quiet in class usually, okay. But when the child was, out there working with their hands, growing those, planting those seeds, growing those vegetables, this child bloomed because the experience that the child came with had a lot of meaning, and it had significance in that classroom because they came with this experience of knowing something about the soil, knowing how certain crops grow, knowing what is needed. So it was a knowledge that suddenly gained a certain kind of legitimacy, if you can call it that, right? So the child became very confident because real world experience was made had significance even in classroom learning. So these are some of the things that I think as teachers, we need to, and I'm sure many of our participants are also, have diverse experiences. I'm sure, and I would be very excited to hear that. Yeah, yeah.
Right. Radha, I think you have cited two other articles also, and also mentioned the kind of experiences. This is really interesting to see that students bring those experiences, and they're really useful and resourceful. They bring resource in the classroom. So how we can do it. And probably this connects with the next question, that you have shared two activities in your article, and that asks for students to explore soil from different parts of their neighborhood for its humus content, and also you have asked them to make humus. So could you tell us something about the process of designing these activities? कि आपने जो दो एक्टिविटी आपने बोला है, जहाँ बच्चों को आसपास के सॉइल को एक्सप्लोर करना है, और उसके बाद ह्यूमस कंटेंट को देखना है, और उसके बाद ह्यूमस को बनाना भी है, खुद भी बनाना है. तो आप कैसे इस प्रोसेस को किया है, बोल पाएंगे?
हाँ, बहुत मतलब हाँ, वो बहुत इम्पोर्टेंट है, क्योंकि जो हम एक्टिविटी का जब डिजाइन करते हैं, मतलब जब हम सोचते हैं कि ये एक्टिविटी कैसे करें, तो फर्स्ट ऑफ कोर्स एज टीचर्स हम डिजाइन कर लेते हैं ना, मतलब वी हैव सम आइडिया, वी से ओके ठीक है, why are we designing this activity? One is, of course, this age group that I was working with. So to develop a sense of curiosity and wonder, in these students, a sense of discovery that soil is not just mud, but it has everything. I mean, it has so many other components to it. And the other thing is that the beauty of this activities, it can be done anywhere, right? It can be done in an urban, rural, small school, large school, anywhere. So it had to be designed in such a way that it was translatable to any location. So one is developing curiosity and wonder. The other is to make sure it can be done anywhere. Then the second important thing is also through this process to build scientific skills, right? Of observation. How do you record something systematically? How do you ask questions about what you've observed? So building those skills as well, right? Now, so in the process of designing the activities, you also test it out. Then there is feedback from the students. Then you go and refine your module, like we all do, right? So when we designed this activity the first time, and children, and both children and myself, we were like we had so many discoveries, and so that helped to refine it even further. So therefore it was a very iterative sort of a process, this process of designing the, for example, we tweaked some of the activities, like say for instance when children were looking at the first time, when they looked at the soil, they only looked at color, texture, etc., etc. But then after that there were questions, about properties of soil, etc. So then we said, okay, we need to also include the water retention ability. How do we test for that? So therefore this whole process was a very iterative process with each batch of students and taking the students feedback into it. Yeah.
So, how many batches of students did you try this out with?
Oh, I think it was over the years, it must have been at least close to 10 batches, Saurabh.
There are
And in
several
multiple
batches,
places. Yeah, yeah, in multiple places also. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah. Absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
one very important point that's coming up from your discussion is the plan that we are
Yeah.
looking at now.
Mhm.
We are in front of us. This has
Correct.
come out after a long exploration and iteration. सो ये बहुत बार किया गया है, रिफाइनमेंट किया गया, उसके बाद इसको हम देख रहे हैं। तो आई थिंक
Correct.
इसके लिए हमें जो एक इंसाइट ये मिल सकता है, जो हमें लग
Mhm.
सकता है कि जरूरी नहीं है कि हम पहला काम ही बहुत अच्छे से करें, एक
हाँ,
बहुत अच्छा एक प्लान बना ले, राइट? हम
हम्म,
बच्चों के
सही
साथ
है।
मिलके इसमें एंगेज होते हैं, किसी एक्टिविटी को रिफाइन कर सकते हैं समय के साथ, जो हमने
Correct.
राधा के काम में भी देख पा रहे हैं, एंड
Yeah,
इवेंचुअली दिस इज देयर।
yeah,
ठीक है। सो आपने कुछ ये भी बोला कि स्टूडेंट के एक्सपीरियंस से भी आपने कुछ डिजाइन में चेंज किया है। तो
correct.
एक तो एग्जांपल आप दे सकते हैं जहां आप स्टूडेंट के
हाँ,
एक्सपीरियंस के जरिए
हाँ।
चेंज हुआ है।
तो एक तो चीज था कि जब हम पहली बार हमने जब सॉइल सैंपल्स देखा, तो पहली बार जब किया था, तो बच्चे मतलब बहुत डिफरेंट लोकेशन से ना बच्चे दे ब्रॉट सॉइल सैंपल्स. Then we put it out there, and even for both of us, I mean for the children and me, we just looked at it and we said, wow, there is like so many different colors of soil, light brown, dark brown, ye wo. So then we thought, acha, to through discussion on that, this humus activity actually evolved. So humus activity उसके बाद उसी में से मतलब शुरू हुआ था. तो it was not a separate activity. हाँ, मतलब उसके बाद उसको अलग किया गया था. Yeah, yeah.
राइट, राइट। And we are already receiving lots of questions, so I think we'll also address these questions in between if
Sure, sure,
not,
absolutely, no
we'll
problem, no
also.
problem. Yeah,
So but before that, we'll finish this part
yeah, sure.
of as your activities.
Yeah,
So, making humus is a long
huh.
process, right?
Correct, correct,
So now, is it not difficult to sustain interest and
correct.
being connected with that? क्योंकि ह्यूमस एक बनाना या बनना एक लंबा प्रक्रिया है, और इस लंबा
Hmm.
प्रक्रिया में बच्चों के इंटरेस्ट, उत्साह को
Hmm.
बरकरार रखना और उसी काम में मन लगा के काम करना, ये क्या संभव है, क्या डिफिकल्टीज होता है, आपका क्या एक्सपीरियंस रहा?
नहीं, वो बहुत मतलब आपका ये क्वेश्चन बहुत ही सॉर्ट ऑफ इम्पोर्टेंट भी है, और मैं जस्ट थोड़ा सोच रही थी कि एक तो इट वाज ओवरऑल आई वुड से कि इट वाज एक्चुअली नॉट दैट डिफिकल्ट टू सस्टेन स्टूडेंट्स इंटरेस्ट, बिकॉज one was ki, when we were sort of making the compost heap, for instance, right? So children actually got quite excited. Huh? And there were children who, particularly children who were from farming backgrounds, they were very excited. They would poke a stick and they would sort of, and they've already seen their parents, or they've seen it happening in their homes. And now they were doing it themselves. So there was a certain excitement about that. And so therefore it was not, I think in that sense, it was not a big challenge, okay, at many levels. And also, for instance, the things that we did in that activity where you poke into the compost pit and then smoke comes out, and so all that really excited the children, and that led to a lot of discussion. But even other children, who didn't come from farming backgrounds, who came from very urban backgrounds, etc., I think it was just the fascination of, okay, what is going to happen? So they would actually every day go and look at it and make notes, and their observations actually became quite acute. So it was quite interesting to see that. Yeah, yeah. So it was not difficult,
Right.
not that difficult. Yes.
Right. So it seems that it is not only the duration, but it is
Yeah.
also what you want to see. If you are
Correct.
waiting to see some processes, and then
Yeah.
you will be engaged with it. So you
Right.
must know what will be the end, what will be the goal,
Right.
shared goal.
Right.
So I'm going to the next point, and I'm connecting with one participant's view also.
Sure.
Kritika says that touching, smelling, observing, and testing, talking about it connects the
Hmm.
content to the
Yeah.
children easily, and she
Very
has
true.
also appreciated the article and also
Okay.
activity. And here I connect with my question that we often speak about engaging head, heart, and hands. The
Hmm.
activities offer direct connections between head and the hands.
Hmm.
So, what kind of suggestions do you offer to the
Hmm.
teachers
Hmm.
uh, about the connecting these processes with children or connecting with heart? Because the
Hmm.
head and hand is there, but
Correct.
how to connect heart?
या
आपको
थैंक्स
कैसे लगा?
कृतिका एक्चुअली हाँ नहीं नहीं और कृतिका का जो कमेंट था बहुत बढ़िया एकदम ना सो तो वे कनेक्शंस विद द हार्ट तो ये थोड़ा मुश्किल है साइंस क्लास में बहुत बार क्योंकि what happens is that this engagement with the senses, right, where you get the students to engage, just for like what Kritika said, get them to smell the soil, to touch it. And some kids, the first time you ask them to touch it, you can see that they've never been exposed to soil. So there are all those things of touching, texture. They'll ask you a lot of questions. Is it okay to touch it? Will I get itching? I mean, those are very real questions, particularly kids who have not been ever been exposed to touching soil, largely from urban backgrounds, for instance. So, and also, this first thing of when you pour water on dry soil and that fabulous smell of the earth, right? So the thing is, I think also, for me, this is something that from just my experience I'm saying is that the connection with the heart also comes with when as a teacher you also मतलब आप घुस जाओ उस पे बच्चों के साथ, you also experience that smell, that touch, and pour the water, and really, so when you engage in that sense, when it's a sensory exchange engagement, then the heart comes in automatically. Yeah, I think that's how it is. Yeah, yeah.
I think Radha, you're quite poetic. While you have very poetically you have put it, and that is a way probably to look at. I don't know what would be the kind of answers we can give, but
Yeah.
sometimes I find that the heart connecting heart also is connected with purpose,
Yes.
and this purpose must be long lasting purpose.
Correct.
For example, if there is a physical appearance or tactile sense of
Hmm.
something,
Hmm.
actually they also tells you something, they talk to you. When I
Hmm.
touch, when I smell, that
Hmm.
soil of all places don't have same smell,
True. Hmm.
texture of all soil are not
Hmm.
same, so they
Hmm.
tell you something. They are talking to you. So I
Correct.
think if we and I think if we want to understand this talk,
Yeah.
we have to put our heart there. Otherwise,
True.
we will
Hmm.
not
No,
hear
very true.
this
Yeah.
point.
Really,
So,
Saurav, absolutely. Absolutely
uh,
spot on. Yeah. Huh.
okay. So Chitra, sorry, Radha, there
Yeah.
is another question from Chitra, and she
Huh.
says, with what age group did you do these activities?
Huh. So that's okay. So now that's an important one actually, because I've done it a lot with, I mean, several of us have done it a lot with sixth standard children, seventh standard children, eighth standard children, but also with primary, pre primary. So it is mostly with, sixth to eighth standard, so which would be just before middle school and middle school, but also with the very young. Yeah. Yeah. So that
Right.
is,
Right.
yes.
So before I go to some questions, I think there are in chat box we have several questions. So
Yeah.
first, let me take those questions.
Sure.
MV says, "Does the soul and heart differ for sand?" and and I think he also wanted to connect with sand again. In his
Hmm.
next question, he says, how to elaborate the difference between soil, sand, clay, or slit from for primary school kids? These are
Okay,
the
so
two questions.
nice. Okay, let's take the first question about, does the soul and heart differ for sand? Well, I think it does, no? I mean, it differs for, so when we talk about the soul and heart, again, when we come back to the point of humus and the biological processes, yes, definitely, they are distinct for different, not just, they're distinct for distinct locations, but also distinct for distinct compositions of of the soil, or in this case that you're talking about, sand is a kind of soil, right? So it is about the biological processes that go into it, and the humus content of sand. So therefore, by location and by the nature of the soil, it would be different. Absolutely, yes. And then the other question that MV, yeah. So what the second question was, how to elaborate the difference between soil, sand,
Right.
clay, or silt for primary school kids. Look, for primary school kids, I don't know. I mean, this is my experience and my understanding as well, that for primary school children, a lot of the differentiation has to be by experience. So through the senses, and that is how you can differentiate between, there is a distinct difference in texture, in color, in composition. I mean, you can actually and also when you pour water, what do you observe? So there is a very so it has to be largely through the process of experience and through exploration using the senses for primary school kids.
Yeah, Radha, it's right.
Yeah,
I
and
think
also, sorry, one more point, MV, would be why, the purpose, like sort of said, what is the purpose of elaborating the difference between these? What's the purpose with which you're doing it? Yeah,
right. So, Radha, I think when you have mentioned the activity, they are
yeah,
also the
yeah,
kind of things you have asked for. So,
yeah.
basically, the same would be applicable here too.
Mm-hmm.
But we will get different results for different things. For
Hmm.
example, as you mentioned about amount of water in the retention, water
Mm-hmm.
retention capacity, etc.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems this will actually give you indications of
Mm-hmm.
how to go about it.
Correct, correct.
And there is a connected questions asked
Hmm.
by Anil Kumar, and he
Hmm.
says, "Is soil a
Hmm.
resultant of sand?"
Hmm. Now,
And right,
I'm not sure I understand that question very clearly, but let me just attempt what I understand. So, is soil a resultant of sand? Now, when we say soil, right, I mean, let's go back to the geology and the physical, chemical, and biological processes that go into formation of soil, right? Sand is formed from a particular geological formation, right? So, you can have sandy soil, clayey soil, loamy soil, and that's what we've studied. So, therefore, it is so when we talk about sand, it is sandy soil you're talking about, right? So we're saying that formation of sand is a function, the origin of sand is from a very different it has a different geological origin compared to, say, clay or laterite, right? Each of these have different geological origins, and the processes that result in the formation of these different kinds of soils are maybe the same processes, as in mechanical processes, chemical processes, and biological processes, but the transformations that happen, the geological changes that happen, are very different. So therefore, that is how I would differentiate it, and I hope, Anil Kumar, that sort of addresses your question. Yeah,
okay. So I think Anil can ask more questions
yeah, more
related to
questions.
this if
Exactly. Yeah,
it is not.
yeah.
But yes, certainly you have answered in a way. And there is another question related to this.
Hmm.
Shai Chand says, "Is
Hmm.
it possible to
Hmm.
change desert soil into fertile soil?"
That's a very good question, because then we have to come back, and like I always do in my class, what do we mean by fertile soil, right? Why do we want to see this? I have to step back a little bit here, because the question then is, what do you mean by fertile soil? Second, the desert soil that belongs to a certain ecosystem, and there is flora, fauna, which is adapted to that ecosystem, right? So, when we are talking about fertile soil, are you talking about fertile soil from, I'm assuming it is from the perspective of growing food, because when we say fertile soil, we usually refer to it in the context of human requirements, right? So, that is the first part, right? The second part, therefore, is if you then want to grow food in a desert soil, then there would have to be modifications to that soil that you have to make. Now, for instance, date palms, right? They grow very well in desert soil, right? So there are various forms of food which communities who have lived in deserts for a long time are able to, harvest from that soil. So when we talk about fertile soil versus desert soil, we're talking about two different things, I think.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
So thank you, Radha. I think you have answered it in a way because you are actually referring to that understanding of
yeah, yeah,
fertility of soil is
yeah,
actually from whose perspective actually,
yeah,
who is looking at it.
yeah,
Or if you increase the amount of water in a desert, probably this will change.
yeah,
Mm, Okay, so Radha, I'm just going to the next question, and
yeah,
this question is also connected with one participant's question. Thank you, Supriya.
hmm,
Supriya says, "What are the challenges you faced while conducting
hmm.
these activities? As children may come from different backgrounds
Yeah,
and have different thoughts." And Radha, I
yeah,
would just connect with the my own question also. That how did the children respond to these activities? So actually, this will be probably one will be the outcome of another.
hmm,
And
hmm.
what kind of unexpected questions came to you?
Hmm, hmm. So, coming to Supriya's question, thank you for that question. Actually, Supriya, like all activities, we always face, there's a bunch of challenges that one does face, and I think I referred to it a little bit earlier. So, when children come from different backgrounds, whether it's urban, rural, etc., and different thoughts. So, when we do these activities, one thing that does happen is that some children, for instance, were very worried about things like insects and worms, and can I touch soil, etc., and so there was a lot of hesitation, right? That is one group, urban children who've never been exposed much to the outdoors or to sand. Then there is some of the other children who were excited about just finding different locations to compare soil. So that was another reaction. But so as far as urban children, and one more point I'd like to add here is, when you get children to engage, and if you and here you have to bring in a bit of structure where you tell them that they have to stay with the activity. You sort of encourage them to stay with the activity, right? Then what happens is the initial hesitation seems to fall away. And I've noticed this not just in the activities that we've done with soils, but also in any other activity where we are outdoors. So it's important to get children to stay with it. Okay. And so that helps, particularly when children are hesitant to touch soil. And very important is for you to physically be involved, because when they see the teacher being physically involved and touching the soil, and and actually collecting it, and sort of pushing things aside and saying, okay, look, wow, there's this here. So you create curiosity there, which many times I have found seems to take away the hesitation and worry, right? Then, and because you asked this question, particularly rural children, when in their case, because they're already exposed to working with soil, or having had experience in seeing at least farming happening, etc., they and I mentioned this a little earlier as well, they got very excited with the humus activity. And when we were talking about the fact that steam was coming out of that manure pit, etc., they had so many questions about how can microorganisms grow in that heat, and can microorganisms grow anywhere in the world, even if it's extreme cold, extreme heat, etc., etc. So there was that whole bunch of questions. So therefore, even the children who were hesitant, right, they also somehow jumped into the activity. But there was, and I just want to share this with I think it was Supriya. Yeah, I just want to share this with you, that there was one child, who said something really quite remarkable. He said that we will. We had, as part of the activity, we said lift the soil, lift the leaf, and collect soil samples from there as well. They said no, the soil should be studied at the location, because if we lift this leaf and if we disturb the one is we're disturbing the habitat of many living things that are there, right? But the other thing is, if we take the sample of soil away from here, right, we will really not be able to describe the soil in its native habitat. So, it's just so surprising, some of the reactions that you get with the children. So, Supriya, yes, children come from different backgrounds, and we've had situations where children have been from mixed backgrounds. And in fact, again, just for your information, I'd like to point you also to Deborah's article in the August 2019, Santosh's article, and you'll see that, even though children come from different backgrounds, their teachers and teachers have found ways to do these activities, even with children from different backgrounds, and get them engaged. So many of these activities are not just designed for a certain kind of background. So Supriya, I hope this really helps you to. It's a bit of a long-winded answer, but I hope it helps you to understand this. Yeah.
Okay, so Radha, I'm just mentioning one comment
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
MB,
Yeah.
and he says that in villages, kids make
Yeah.
toys from pond soil,
Yeah.
right, and make caves from sand.
That is right. True. Yeah.
So
So true.
it seems that students know the
Correct.
properties of the sand
Exactly.
and soil.
Exactly. Exactly.
So this technical point. So
Yeah.
now a very interesting question has appeared here, and I think you will like it, because your article is also focusing on that, and it has mentioned. So
Correct.
Nirmal Neolia says, "Is
Yeah.
soil living or non-living? How do we deal with such questions with students?" That is what Nirmal says. But
Hmm.
then, in response to Nirmal's question, I think
Hmm.
uh, Ayan Castellino says that
Hmm.
soil is a living entity and must be affected by the earth's rhythms.
Hmm.
How
Hmm.
do changing seasons affect the
Hmm.
soil and flowering or fruit bearing nature of
Hmm.
the plants? Is
Hmm.
there a clear way of knowing it?
Hmm. Okay, very
So,
interesting. So we have this very interesting conversation that is going on there. So this thing about living, non-living, it's a tricky question, because, and here I'd like to sort of come back to the first point that where Saurav and I were talking, where we talked about this thing of living and non-living, and how we create these very clear binaries, right? And as we learn more and more about the living world, we also understand that these clear demarcations between living and non-living may not be as clear as we thought they were, right? And soil, right? And soil is a place where you actually can engage with this question with students, isn't it? So I was thinking that wouldn't this be, Nirmal, wouldn't this also be a great opportunity to engage with students on the fact that science is really not definitive. As we get more and more evidence, we go back to our question and we modify that question to understand another dimension of it. So, in that sense, I think it would be an excellent way for students to be introduced to this idea of how do definitions evolve, and how do these and how these kind of clear separations or walls or categorizations that we do how do we think about these things? So, and as Ian answered, and I do, and that's what I've tried to say in this article, that soil is a living entity because what is soil composed of, right? And this is something to do with students, right? Where you look at soil and say, okay, what is this soil made up of? There is mineral matter, there is microorganisms here, there are insects here, there is leaf matter. So there is all of this that exists in this sample of soil, or in this small portion of soil. So how do you separate and say that soil is not living? How do you do that, right? So now to come to Ian's question, how do changing seasons affect the soil and flowering, fruit bearing, etc. Now, of course, changing seasons, and I'm assuming when Ian says changing seasons, are we talking about the routine change of seasons? And if we are, then that's one thing. But then is it also about the changes in seasons that we're seeing because of changing climate? So I will take the first interpretation. And changing seasons affect the soil because the temperature changes, humidity changes, moisture levels change, biological life changes, isn't it? I mean, microbial composition of that soil changes because of change in the climate, I mean, in the weather. So all of that affects soil formation. Also, with changing seasons, there is change in the leaf fall. There is change in life cycle of animals and plants, which essentially contribute to the composition of the soil. Right. So therefore that's how I would sort of understand the process of changes in soil being affected by seasons. And of course the flowering or fruit bearing nature of plants completely, because when you have if it's largely a flowering plant, for instance, right, then the requirements of flowering plants, what are the nutritional requirements of flowering plants, how do flowering plants actually take uh, take the nutrients from the soil. For instance, when you have flowering plants that produce a lot of nectar, which insects feed on, then the composition of that nectar requires a certain in order to for the production of that nectar, what is required from the soil is very different. So what the plant takes from the soil is going to be very different from a fruit bearing tree, isn't it? So I'm not sure about when you say clear way of knowing this, but there have been a lot of experiments. There is research that is anyway being done on what contributes to the formation, to the composition, the nutritional composition of fruits and flowers, which then in turn, have other ramifications for other living systems, other living beings in the ecosystem. So, if you're talking about a clear way of knowing this, I would imagine yes, there is research and there are publications, but I'm hoping that's what Ian. So, of course, Ian, if there are more questions, please, yeah.
Right. So I think it is very one way to look at this also with a pattern recognition and actually population
Right.
study, right?
Exactly.
So they stay in a statistical way. So, for
Mm-hmm.
example, in one location, different plants may have responded differently. So
Mm-hmm.
there is
Mm-hmm.
statistically you can say something, but
Mm-hmm. Yes.
maybe not very
Yes.
specifically.
Correct. Yes, you're
So
absolutely right. Patterns and yeah, absolutely. The patterns is one way of looking at it. Yeah. Sorry, Saurabh. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Radha, I am just thinking that to go my questions again, because
Hmm.
some of the questions actually are so tempting, and this will also connect with the audience question.
Right.
So, uh, there are the connectedness with these activities, and
Right.
you have mentioned that different students from different background equally respond to these activities.
Yeah.
Now, could you share some ways in which teachers can use this theme and exercises to connect to other subjects and disciplines like soil?
Hmm. So One thing is, for instance, like you had talked earlier about different subjects, right? Where soil occurs, where we come across soil, right? But I would say that, for instance, if we take this theme of soil and if we connect it to, the same activities, in fact, we could connect it to geography, for instance, right? Why are soils different in different places? How is it related to the geology of the place, and then therefore how does it relate to, so for instance, even if you take soil from multiple locations in a place and you find that there are differences in the appearance or the texture, etc., etc., then you can sort of say, wow, if it is like this in this small area of our compound or of a campus, then imagine what it must be like in a larger location. And then how does that relate to what grows there? What is the climate there? What are the factors that are transforming that soil there? So that's one obvious way, which is in geography. But also, I was thinking here that earlier there used to be this the study of natural history, right? Where you looked at an organism in its entirety in terms of how did it get here, why is it here and not somewhere else. So in that sense, I'm wondering, even from a historical perspective, say from a history perspective, or the geological history of a place, right? So even that could be very useful. We could connect that to soil, because then, if in a given place, wherever the school is, for instance, there is soil, and then how were the houses built in this area historically, right? What was the material that was used? Was it mud? Was it stone? And how does that relate to soil? Because after all, what is soil formed there, right? It is the geological processes which have broken, physical, chemical, biological process, biogeochemical processes which have broken it down. So that's another way, right, to look at history of the place, but really look at more the geological history, and also how people in the area lived, and how did they farm, and what did they grow there, etc. Of course,
Right.
you said this earlier as well, local songs, because there are so many songs and poems around earth, around soil, around land, right? So I think, and obvious connections to physics and chemistry are always there. But I think these are some other connections that could
Right.
definitely be, yeah.
Actually, the next question I will ask, connected to your this where you have stopped. I
Yeah.
will ask in connection to that only. But I also want to connect with what Nirmal said earlier. He
Huh.
actually said that how do we deal with such questions with students about soil living or non-living, right?
Hmm.
So I am connecting with the
Hmm.
next question, and I am finding a very good connections with it.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
in your article, you wrote, while most of us tend to think of soil as being static and inert,
Hmm.
in reality, it is a
Hmm.
complex medium
Hmm.
which is constantly being formed.
Hmm.
Now, this seems to suggest two understanding of soil. One is static,
Hmm. Hmm.
that we started off, and then we are also saying now we are saying that is a some understanding about dynamic nature of it, complex medium. It's emerging out. So could you enlighten us on some scientific and historical processes that have led to this conflicting beliefs?
Hmm. That's a good question. And I have a feeling it's going to be a bit of a longish answer. So I'm going to attempt this, okay? Sort of. So the thing
Okay.
is that, I think, to look at it from the point of view of the historic and scientific, the process actually that has taken place, maybe we could call it the how soil science has progressed, the history of soil science, for instance, right? So, like all science, there is a social context in which it happens, right? So, in the case of soil, of course, the very obvious context that soil science has evolved in is the economic, because of its importance in agriculture, right? And also, in a sense, cultural perceptions of soil and of the environment. So, if we went back historically a little bit, right? And here, I want to sort of go back quite a bit. Okay, So let's go back to the words soil and humus, actually. And I think it's very important to connect the two because, you know, if you look at the origin of the word humus, right? If you look at the etymology of the word humus, humus is a Latin word. And what does it mean? It means earth or ground, right? So apparently, I mean, from whatever I've read, apparently, if in the past, particularly during ancient Roman periods, the word humus was what was used for soil. Okay, the term, and then subsequently, for some reason, and that is not very clear. After the first century, humus got phased out of usage, and it was replaced by terra. So humus used to be used as in the sense of soil, but then it got replaced by terra. And in a sense, what the word, the word humus, or that we sort of use, or the word soil that we use later, it came into usage really much later in science. Okay. Now, if we also, there's another thing that I would like to bring up here, which is that if we look at the history of soil science again, this evolution of this knowledge, right? It evolved with debates and discoveries around photosynthesis, the understanding of plant nutrition, the theories around plant nutrition. So all of this has influenced how our understanding of soil. So there are some researchers who've done a very interesting sort of classification, if you like, or a kind of a timeline, right? They say that the period before 1840, right, that is before the Industrial Revolution, you could call it the humic period, okay, where humus and soil were kind of synonymously used, right? So that means that's a very different understanding of soil, right? Then you had the mineralist period that they call, which is between 1840 and 1940. So here there is the influence of the Industrial Revolution and the beginnings also of the work of chemists like Liebig and others who brought in the understanding that plant growth, right? That mineral fertilizers are needed for plant growth. Okay, so when that understanding emerged, and juxtapose that also with the First World War and then the preparation for the Second World War, where just before the Second World War, you had Haber's process for ammonia production, right? So before this, of course, you mined nitrates and ammonia and ammonium salts from rocks or from guano. Now, so with Haber's process, you had an industrial production of ammonia. It was used during the Second World War for different purposes. I mean, it was used as for warfare, right, for ammunition. But following the Second World War, this technology was available, and it matched this understanding of the need for mineral fertilizers for plant growth, and you had the fertilizer industry, right? So therefore, so there is this huge period when soil was, in a sense, considered almost without life, I would imagine. That is, and what I'm trying to say here is that the biological processes of soil were kind of subsumed, or they were sort of, मतलब उनको almost नीचे डाल दिया गया to some extent, कि जो dominant understanding था तब ना, वो ये था कि minerals have to be added to that plants and that soil becomes useful. उसके बाद मतलब 1940 के बाद and much later, so in the 60s and 70s, for instance, we understand, and of course we had the Green Revolution in India when fertilizer was used extensively. Again, definition of soil, I mean the understanding of soil changed. Organic matter, soil fertility, everything was linked to industrial process, technological processes and industrial processes of making soil healthy. तो उसके बाद जो है ग्रीन रेवोल्यूशन के बाद ऑफ कोर्स people have understood what the implications of that have been on soil. So globally, of course, 60s में वो understanding आ गया था, या 50s 60s में understanding आ गया था, but then later on India में उसके बाद ही आ रहा है. So that the last period, which is the ecological period in which we are in today to some extent, There is an increased understanding that we need to rejuvenate soil, or actually soil has life, or it has biological processes. And then of course 1938 में सेलमैन का काम आया था, जहाँ पे उन्होंने डेफिनेशन किया ह्यूमस का. तो इन अ सेंस ये था एक मतलब चेंजिंग डेफिनेशन ऑफ सॉइल, अंडरस्टैंडिंग ऑफ सॉइल. और अब तो ऑफ कोर्स हम लोग और भी बात कर रहे हैं सॉइल के बारे में कि सेक्वेस्ट्रेशन ऑफ कार्बन और क्लाइमेट चेंज में उसका क्या सिग्निफिकेंस है, ऑर्गेनिक फार्मिंग, सस्टेनेबिलिटी, वो सब मतलब अभी तो बहुत फर्क हो रहा है. तो थोड़ा लंबा चौड़ा आंसर दिया मैंने आपको, लेकिन ये
No,
था.
that's fine. That's fine. So actually, you have raised several other interesting issues also, and uh, regarding the living and non-living, I can understand that you are saying that we should not actually really go into the specifically talking about living and non-living. Rather, leave it to students and uh, let us make it as an opportunity to discuss about this.
That's right.
And if this is so, then I will stop with the last question related to this point, because it is so interesting and important. It seems to me, after hearing you, that you are suggesting that recognizing soil as a living entity helps us see its central role in our food system and in our response to climate change. In your article, also, there is an indication of that. So, could you kindly elaborate it on
Okay.
this?
Actually, you're right. This is a good point to talk about that because we've just entered into that phase. So, now one thing is, okay, when we recognize that soil is a living entity, what do we understand? We understand that there are biological processes. There is a particular role for microorganisms, particularly fungi, and also several other flora and fauna, which contribute to building this fertility, or this what do we call, building the humus, or building a certain property of soil, right? So when the use of synthetic fertilizers and other plant protection chemicals like pesticides, etc., are used, this flora and fauna gets impacted. There is a loss of this flora and fauna because of these chemicals, which are aimed at killing insects or other pests. And so what happens is that therefore then reduces the ability of the organic content of soil to be built up, because after all it is these living biological processes which lead to the formation of the organic content. In addition to that, of course, there is the toxic residues from pesticides and fertilizers, etc. So therefore what happens is that the soil's ability to what is called the soil's health and its diversity of biological diversity are seriously impacted. Now, one thing we do know, that the quality of the soil has a directly determines the nutritional quality of food, right? So now when you recognize soil as a living entity, then you begin to look at soil very differently. Then the way you grow your food also becomes very different, right? It then begins to you replace your synthetic fertilizers and pesticides probably with more natural alternatives. You change your practices of farming so that soil fertility is built up by these practices, not just by addition of something, but even by growing multiple crops. You use what are now increasingly being called agroecological processes. You mulch, you cover the soil with leaf litter. So you help the soil to retain moisture. You provide all conditions which will allow the soil to rejuvenate and regenerate, right? So that completely changes the way you relate to soil, and therefore that changes the way food is produced. That changes the nutritional content of food, and then therefore the cycle continues. You have long term, you sustain a very different kind of food system. So that is one part. And the other part of it, of course, is that because of this buildup of organic matter through the processes that we just talked about, there is carbon sequestration, right? And and also what happens is when we develop a food system which is built on all these principles, then your use of fossil fuels and your dependency on fossil fuels also comes down, because as we all know, the pesticide and fertilizer industry is built on the petrochemical industry, which is fossil fuel, right? And so the way we, and so then even the scale at which food is produced, that comes down. So there's a lot of changes that happen, as a result of which, both directly through carbon sequestration of soils and vegetation, you have a response to climate change, but by also transforming your food system, you're responding to climate change by mitigating the effects of climate change. So, yeah, so I would say it
Right.
has.
Very true. I think it is also about the it is not also, but it seems it integrates in the elements of life, right?
Yes.
Dynamism,
Yeah, that's
interaction.
true.
It
Mm,
interacts. Uh,
yes,
uh, for
yes,
every factors, it responds to it. It
yeah,
responds. So
yeah.
it does not take things inertly. So,
Very true. Yeah,
Radha, I am taking other questions also from
yeah,
participants.
yeah.
Sonal Lal says,
Mm,
without soil, there is no fertility, but
okay,
people normally don't want to live in muddy areas. How
okay.
do we help students discover the importance of soil? It's a very critical question.
Very critical question.
And
So, yeah, go
sorry,
ahead.
Radhika, Radha, I'm just adding one more comments with that. Where Kritika says, living in concrete house,
Mm,
consuming chemically grown vegetables, using iron and
mm,
other metals on daily
mm,
basis, extracted
mm,
from soil, etc., making
mm.
me feel guilty. So it seems a connection is there.
Yeah,
Yes,
that's very
Radha,
true.
please.
Very, very true. Yeah. Sonal, I think Kritika's comments actually are so pertinent to your question. No, I mean, yes, the thing is, yes, I mean, so I want to just talk about one thing here. There is the intellectual understanding. Okay, we may all have it, right? And even with students, right? You can have the intellectual understanding that soil is very important, etc., etc. But to help students discover the importance of soil, I tell you, I mean, the one way to do it really is to engage them. There is no other way than engaging them. In my book, there is no other way than engaging them to grow food, because it can be done even in gamlas, है ना? Matlab, you can, and then to, I mean, I'll tell you, even in small pieces of, in compounds of small schools, I'll tell you one, I mean, I can share one example where this is in a city school, and also, of course, in Deborah's article, you'll see how in urban areas, children were growing food on, on the terrace. So, and in small, in tiny places, when you get, you don't need, like, even if you don't have a big field, when you get children to grow food, even if it is, one thing, a vegetable or something small, even, um, it can be a project that's happening on the side. It doesn't have to get into your main, I know teachers are very, very, teachers have a lot of syllabi, etc., to finish, etc. But this can be happening on the side. You see, it can be an ongoing activity where children are, given access to growing some food. And I'm telling you, it's just remarkable how their relationship to soil changes. I mean, it might seem like a very simple thing, but do try it. And because personally, I have seen adults changing when they grow food, and
Right.
you know how hardened adults are. They complete relationship changes.
True.
So
And
yeah,
I also and I believe, not only I believe, we have experimented. It is possible to even finish syllabus with
हाँ,
while growing
yes,
vegetables.
सही
ये
बात है
लार्ज
एकदम.
एक बहुत बड़ा हिस्सा है करिकुलम का जो
हाँ,
इसके ऊपर है, मगर
हाँ.
हमें वो ध्यान देना पड़ेगा. हमारे ध्यान नहीं होता है शायद.
करेक्ट, करेक्ट.
मैं कुछ
और सौरभ, एक
यस
पॉइंट
प्लीज.
अगर मैं डालूं कि जब आप ऐसे मतलब फूड, छोटे छोटे, इसमें व्हेन यू स्टार्ट ग्रोइंग फूड, आपको और भी बोनस आता है क्योंकि इंसेक्ट्स
ट्रू.
आते हैं, है
ट्रू.
ना? तो फिर, और अगर आप मैन्योर डालोगे ना, तो मैन्योर से भी आपको जो आपने जिसका बीजा भी नहीं डाला आप, वो भी उग जाएगा. तो आपको उसके बारे में भी आप डिस्कस कर सकते हैं। तो ये एक
Right.
बहुत ही बढ़िया आपको एक साइट मिल जाता है और कॉन्वर्जेशंस का, बायोलॉजी के मतलब बायोलॉजी क्लास के
Very
लिए।
true.
हाँ हाँ
Very true. Even I would rather, Radha, I would extend your point. I would
हाँ
say कि
हाँ
एक्चुअली हम लोअर ग्रेड में, मतलब हम
हाँ
प्राइमरी ग्रेड में
हाँ
या अपर प्राइमरी ग्रेड में हम ऐसे
हाँ,
बहुत कुछ सिखा सकते हैं जो बच्चे हाई स्कूल या इंटरमीडिएट में पढ़ते हैं,
सही बात,
11 12 में
एकदम,
पढ़ते हैं बच्चे, वो
एब्सोल्युटली
चीज़ हम सिखा
एब्सोल्युटली,
सकते हैं,
यस,
दे एनकल्चरिंग स्टूडेंट्स टू दैट कल्चर।
करेक्ट,
मैं अभी कुछ कमेंट्स लेता हूँ पहले।
हम्म
पी श्रीनिवास बासु
हम्म
have mentioned that
हम्म,
he has made soil components in terms of sand, silt,
या
and clay in soil.
या
And so he has mentioned soil characters, physical,
हम्म
biological, chemical,
हम्म
soil qualifiers,
हम्म,
3 M's he mentioned,
राइट,
matter, moisture, microbes.
या या,
So thank you, Bashu.
थैंक
And
यू, यस यस,
then Srinivasa PN
हम्म
says earlier in villages, a bit
हम्म
of powdered soil would be
हम्म
applied to a wound. What are
हम्म
the chemical changes?
I don't know actually. I really don't know. I mean, would it be a certain kind of soil? Because different soils have different microorganisms, different compositions. So I don't know, Srinivasa. I mean, if it has anything to do with particular kind of soil, no, I'm afraid I don't have. I don't know that. Yeah,
Right. So
yeah,
we can think about it.
yeah, yeah.
Let's-
Might be
Okay.
interesting wherever you've come across it to talk to local people and understand, like because there is also that other kind of understanding from experience and experiential understanding. So I think it might be an interesting question to explore. कि भाई क्यों डालते हो आप?
True.
Yeah. हाँ.
True. So then we have other questions too,
Hmm.
and uh, this some of the questions are actually also referring to
Hmm.
that. For example, you have 1 minute.
Hmm.
1 minute.
Hmm.
So some questions include like, is it
I,
possible to convert
हाँ.
sand into humus soil?
I thought I just saw that question too. So that's an interesting one actually. Now, when so again, I think we have to come back to this understanding, no? Like, what is humus, right? What we talked about. It is that it's the organ. It is essentially humic, fulvic, a whole series of acids and chemical and sort of compounds that collectively form humus, and it is and to put it broadly, it is the organic content of soil, right? Now, when you say convert sand into humus soil, I think we have to slightly rephrase this question, because humus is a component of soil, right? I mean, soil is made up of humus and many other things, and humus gives it its organic content. So, if you want to bring about humus in sand, right? Depending upon the origin of that sand, depending upon there is always some organic matter in most soils. So you will have to add certain components to that sand in order for certain kinds of biological processes to be triggered, so that the humus content in sand increases. Okay, so I would sort of look at it like that, because when we talk about humus in soil, it is the amount, I mean, it is the percentage of humus in soil that defines different kinds. For instance, soil in a tropical rainforest would have a humus content which is very different from soil in a temperate forest. And so, therefore, the organic content of sand is very different, and you want to increase the organic content of sand, then you have to supplement it, or you have to add other material to it in order to trigger biological processes that would increase the organic content of sand. I hope that makes sense.
Okay, okay. So Radha, I'm thinking that we can take the last question from the participants,
Sure,
and
sure.
this question is: how can we stop desertification of soil?
Hmm. That's a that's like the $1 million question that many people are trying to resolve today. So,
Right.
Sai Chand, right now, how can we? So, okay, let's go back to what we mean by desertification of soil. Right now, there is a lot of diverse understanding of this process of. So, when we say desertification, typically, what is the understanding? Absence of very luxuriant visible vegetation. Okay, usually when we talk about desertification of soil, I'm not sure what exactly you mean, Saichan, but let's assume that you mean the soil losing its ability to support extensive amount of vegetation, right? Now, if I understand that to be the meaning of your question, then desertification can happen because of natural processes, right? Like, for instance, the Sahara, the Sahel region in Africa, right? Between the Sahara and that the whole band between in the middle of North Africa. That there, the desertification of that area, that is loss of moisture, increase in aridity, loss of organic content, happen because of changing climates. In some other places, it also happens because of human activity, which results in removal of vegetation. You clear it for various developmental work, to build cities or to grow food. You may do it for various things. So one is to find ways to prevent this kind of process. That is, if you were looking at desertification of an area which was earlier, heavily vegetated, right? Then, in order to stop it, you would obviously prevent clearing of that area, right? The other way is when that is not possible, because when you have to build cities and homes, etc., can you can you vegetate other parts? Can you not remove vegetation where it is not necessary? Can you build around vegetation? Can you include vegetation in, and when I say vegetation, I mean all kinds of plants, okay, whether it is shrubs or trees, because trees are found in certain places, grasslands are found in other places. Depending on the ecosystem, you have different kinds of vegetation. So, and often when people talk about desertification, it's about loss of moisture. So, how do you retain moisture in soil? So, one is by using covering vegetation, because, as you know, roots of plants, whether it's grasses or trees, they hold moisture in the soil. The other is to actually, cover the, particularly if you're in a place which has been desertified as a result of this kind of clearing of vegetation, you can cover it with leaf litter. You can add manure. You can fertilize it with all of this and build up the soil material. You can grow fast growing species of plants which will give you the leaf litter, and once that soil is built, you can then you have rejuvenated the soil. Okay, so to summarize, really, it is about having vegetation on the soil. It is about preventing soil moisture, loss of soil moisture, and then, of course, automatically the organic content increases. And one last point about desertification is, of course, excessive usage of synthetic fertilizers and pesticides can strip the soil of a lot of the flora and fauna that are responsible for building humus in soil and building organic content in soil. So, to eliminate that process and allow the soil to rejuvenate by supporting it with things that will, allow will allow biological processes to be rejuvenated. When you do that, then you can arrest the desertification of soil. So, Saichand, I am afraid I gave you a very long-winded answer again, but I hope somewhere yeah, it addresses the question.
Okay. So, Radha, we are running short of time. So,
Yes,
the
we are.
last question that is in my mind is this article appears under the section Teaching
Yeah.
as if the Earth Matters.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
This is also the theme of our latest issue.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
why does this section matter? Uh, Also, what can our readers expect from our latest issue?
Okay. One thing is that it's very interesting that soil is also called earth, right? Right. But of course, in this section that it's called teaching as if the earth matters, we're talking about planet Earth at one level and also earth as in soil. Um, Now, one thing is that through science, of course, we have learned a lot about um how wondrous and awesome our environment is, right? But we've also used that understanding of science to create very, very profound impacts on the environment. So, therefore, there is a very strong need for us to begin to think and act very, very differently so that we can sustain life on Earth, right? And where do we begin to do this? Well, we have to learn differently, which means we have to educate ourselves and the next generation differently. And we have to educate ourselves differently, and we have to internalize. We have to really internalize the idea that the earth does matter, not just for ourselves, but for all of life. Okay, so we have no business, not considering the earth because we have no business destroying other life as well. Right? So, therefore, the earth matters, and through our education, our learning processes, we have to internalize this idea and we have to begin with it in schools. And so, with that intention, whatever we bring through I Wonder under this section, it sort of speaks to this. The latest issue, the theme itself is, teaching as if the earth matters. And there we have some very rich experiences from educators, from teachers, and very, very inspiring experiences of how, in multiple and diverse contexts, how they have been able to create learning environments and learning spaces. And they teach in a way that as if the earth does matter, right? And that's at the heart of their teaching learning program. So please do check out our latest issue, and we would love to hear feedback from you on it. Yeah, thanks.
Right. So, thank you, Radha, for introducing the new issue to us. I will just read out some of the comments that has been received, and then after that we will probably end.
Mm-hmm.
So, Jan says there is much more to explore and realize in my understanding of the soil. So, of us, we also have to work on it. And it is important to accompany scientific understanding with an intuitive knowing. So, that is
Right.
what saying. And then we have some more comments on Chitra says the perspective shift when you realize that soil is alive is significant.
Mm-hmm.
And Shashi says, I think this is the need of the hour where our children, need of the hour where our children should know where food comes from a farm and is grown in soil and not from growers. Uh, so, and there are some more questions too, but I'm sorry we cannot take these questions. We are running short of time. I'm so sorry. But before concluding, thank you, Radha,
Thank
and
you.
thank you all
Yeah.
for participating, questioning,
Really.
patiently hearing, responding, sending comments, etc., etc. Thank
Yeah.
you, everyone. We
Yeah.
may not have been able to take all your questions as you have mentioned, and for that, my sincere apology. Apology, please accept it, and join us again for our next webinar on September 8th this year, 2021. For all those who have not yet subscribed to iWonder, please do so now. Thank you. Thank you once again. Thank you, Radha, and everyone.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for the wonderful questions. It was such a lovely session. Thank you. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Saurabh.